Hello everyone, this is the first lecture of Module 4 in a series of lectures that I've been delivering to cover the Software Project Management course at the Department of Software Engineering, Faculty of Computer and Information Technology, Jordan University of Science and Technology. This slide elaborates on the content of Module 4. Which comes in three parts: software project contracts and software project management and execution, and then the ISO IEC 12207 standard for systems and software engineering life cycle. Now, the project contracts. In general, any contract would include a generic description of the project to start with, then the objectives and the anticipated outcomes of that project, and then the terms and conditions, including the SLA, the service level agreement. Also, the IPs should be addressed in the contract. The intellectual property, I meant, who owns the intellectual properties if something comes out of the project, the confidentiality of information, such that an NDA or non-disclosure agreement should be signed between the two parties, and it goes as part of the contract as well, and so on. After going over the contract content, then we will talk about the contract types. The contract types start with performance-based contracts, then we talk about the time and material contract, and then we will talk about the agile contracts. Now, the agile contracts, to understand them, we need to understand the agile software development methods as well. And last but not least, in this part, we will talk about the agile project management. Now, with the software project management and execution, we'll talk about the contract management, change management, phases of contract management, contract compliance and governance, subcontractors management, project accounting, and procurement, and then we'll talk about the contract management software. Now, for the third part of this module, the ISO IEC 12207 standard for systems and software engineering lifecycle, we'll talk about two faults, or we will have two faults for this. First of all, we'll talk about the primary lifecycle phases of this standard, including its processes or the processes of each of these phases, and then we'll talk about the deliverables of the various phases. Now back to the primary life cycle phases. The first phase is the acquisition, and it includes many processes such as the initiation process, request for proposal preparation process, contract preparation process, contract change negotiation process, contract update process, contract signature process, supplier monitoring process, acceptance and completion process, per which we accept, shows us how to accept, or what makes us to accept a contract or to accept a project, etc., etc. The second phase is the supply phase, and it has processes. We'll talk about them later on. The third phase is the development phase. Development phase includes or has many processes such as functional requirements definition process, high-level design creation process, module design, testing, etc., etc. The fourth phase and the fifth phase are the operation phase and maintenance phase, which very much go together hand in hand. We'll talk about their details later on. And the last phase is the destruction phase. Again, we'll talk about this later on. So very much that's all for the content of this module 4. Okay, this slide provides a sample project description. As you see, it starts with a simple statement. This project is meant to design, develop, test, implement, and support a new admission and registration system. For whom? The customer is, as indicated by the second statement, the new admission and registration system will be used at or by Jordan University of Science and Technology. So here we define the customer. Then what is the purpose of the system? It will be used to manage and perform all activities related to admitting and registering students for courses according to their specialization academic advisory plan. Um, Also, in the description, we address or we mention the project management approach that will be followed to carry on the project. Here it says this project will follow the typical project management approach: initiation phase, then the planning phase, then execution phase, then monitoring and control phase, and last but not least, the closure phase. And then we move to support. The last part would address the period of a project as constrained by the customer. The customer may require you to say that, okay, this project will be carried on or will be completed within a certain period of time. Here in this sample, it indicates that this project will be or should be completed within 6 months. Okay, this slide elaborates on a project's terms and conditions, SLAs, and the ITIL. Now, the terms and conditions in any contract, in any project contract, where do they come from? Well, here we have this list. The first source would be the terms and conditions imposed by the customer initially in the RFP document. We have terms and conditions that would be added or adjusted during the negotiations between the customer and the service provider. And the negotiation can be during the proposal discussion and negotiation, or even the contract when they come to finalize the contract. There might be some terms and conditions suggested or asked for by the service provider. Those would be included if the customer approves them or endorses them. Any assumptions that might be made by the customer, the service provider, if they are accepted by or endorsed by the customer, they would be added to the terms and conditions. We have some conditions that have to do with the service level agreement itself. So the level of service is governed by some terms and conditions, and those are included as well in the terms of and conditions as well. The performance level terms and conditions can be added as well. We may think of many other sources for terms and conditions. The payments terms and conditions can be added as well, and so on. Now, talking about the service level agreements, SLAs, in the following slide, we'll talk about like a sample SLA, which comes from the Indiana Office of Technology, the Indiana state. And that document is very much the governing document for their delivery services for the enterprise service level agreement, in which they govern their relation with the Indiana state. Last but not least, the ITIL. ITIL stands for the Information Technology Infrastructure Library, and the students can search for ITIL. Just Google ITIL and you will find many sources about this. I'm not going to get into much details, but ITIL in general has two folds: the service management and service delivery. There's some certification involved in this, and I will leave it up to students to look into this if they are interested. Basically, that's all for this slide. Well, here's the sample SLA that we have in hand. It's from the Indiana Office of Technology from the state of Indiana. It's dated back to July 2014 through June 2015. Now, here's the table of content. What is included in such an SLA or such a document? First of all, after the introduction, it talks about the delivery service, the service environment that they have, then the service level agreement components that they are looking at, and then it talks about the service level agreement from the following perspectives, four perspectives: customer services, service administration, system administration services, and then network services, and then the field operations. Now, for each of these four perspectives, they address the service level requirements, the SLRs. Also, for each of them, they talk about the service goals, then the service environment and facilities, and then what is required in the hardware and software from, for example, here the customer service perspective, and what are the roles and responsibilities that involve the customer services. Now, then they wrap up the service level agreement, service level requirements for that perspective. For example, here, the service level requirements for the customer services. Same thing with the system administration services. They start with the systems administration goals, and then the service environment and facilities for the system administration. And then what do they need to have in the hardware and software from the systems administration services perspective, and then the roles and responsibilities that involve systems administration and services, and then they wrap up the service level requirements for the system administration. Same thing they do with the networking. Start with the network service goals, then the network services environment and facilities, and what do they need to have in the hardware and software for network services, and then the roles and responsibilities that involve the network and services, and then last but not least, the service level requirements for the network services. With the field operations, the same thing, the field operation goals, and then the service environment and facilities, and then the hardware and software. What do they need to see in these from the field operation perspective, and then the roles and responsibilities that involve field operations, and the last, they wrap up the field operations service level requirements. The last thing, two things, and then at the end they provide, two things: the escalation process through which either of the two parties can go through if an issue is not resolved. The last page or two, they provide a sample monthly SLA compliance report. Let's go over them one by one. Here, what are the service level agreement components? They have four components: the service, customer services, system administration services, as we indicated earlier, network services, and then field operation services. So these are the components of the service level agreement. Now, for each of these components, they provide like an introductory description, then the service goals of that component, and the service environment and facilities, and the hardware and software that are supported from the perspective of that component, then the roles and responsibilities for that component, and then the service level requirements for that component as well. Here it talks about the customer services, which is the first component. It starts with the objectives. I'm not going to read them, but you can see here that we have three goals. Customer service shall be the single point of contact to initiate solving state of Indiana customer computer resources and information technology problems, from processing a customer trouble call and to request a development project, etc., etc. So there are three objectives or goals, and then it describes the environment. Look at here, it's a general description of the service environment and facilities, the Indiana Office Technology Delivery Services. Customer service shall provide services to all state of Indiana agencies within the private network. The team operates 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday, with a small subset of the team working a few designated hours on weekends. Outside of these hours of operation, a trouble call will be forwarded to a designated customer service standby staff. So this is like a sample description of the environment, how things work out. Then, as you see here, for the hardware and software, all hardware and software used for the provision of customer service described in this service level agreement are provided and supported by the Indiana Office Technology Delivery Services. Then the roles and responsibilities. The first role for customer services, the first component of this SLA, first role is to develop, document, approve, and implement procedures that meet required policies and policies. The second role is to provide a single point of contact for state of Indiana agency customers to request assistance, etc., etc. So there are 12 roles that they need for the customer services component. Here they talk about the service availability, normal business hours support, schedule Monday to Friday, 6 to 18, which is 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Addition to the normal business hours, like Saturday, 7 a.m. to 13 or 1 p.m. After hours support, scheduled Monday to Friday, 18 to 6 p.m. and which is 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. sorry, and then Sunday to and Saturday from 0 to 24, like the holidays. Okay, let's move forward. The second component, the systems administration services, very much they do the same here. They talk about the goals, and then they describe the hardware and software. Then they talk about the roles and responsibilities. And then they summarize the requirements for the second component. The third component, the network services, they start with the goals, the environment and facilities, the hardware, the roles and responsibilities. Here, too many roles. Then they summarize the service level requirements. The last component, the field operations, the same thing. The objectives, the service environment and facilities, then the hardware and software, then the roles and responsibilities, and then they summarize the service level requirements. Um, Now the escalation process here says every ticket or a request for adjustment, for change, for fixing an issue, like 8 hours should be the response time for account management issues, 16 hours for applications, 32 hours for data management, 32 hours for database, 40 hours for hardware, and so on. And here is a sample monthly SLA compliance report. As you can see, uh, speed to answer calls. Well, it's like 90% of the calls were answered under 60 seconds. So that makes things good, and so on. Well, basically that's all for this, and I will leave it to my students to print out this sample SLA, read it carefully to understand its content. Good luck. Thank you. Okay, this slide elaborates on performance-based contracts. We refer to them as performance-based contracts, performance-based logistics, performance-based acquisition. They are widely used in the defense industry, and they're referred to as the preferred method for acquiring services. Now, performance-based contracting develops strategic performance metrics and associate those measures or metrics with the contracting payment performance or the level of payments. The matrix include, or the quality factors include the availability, reliability, maintainability, supportability, and the total cost of ownership of the system. Now, earlier we explained the availability, the reliability, maintainability, and supportability. And now let's elaborate on the total cost of ownership from the customer perspective. So what is the total cost of ownership of the customer when they carry on a project? Well, in addition to the cost of executing the project, which is paid to the service provider, the customer also carried on some initial costs during the preparation period, the initiation and the planning, their initiation and planning when they issued or prepared the RFP, the request for proposal. Their staff or the customer staff who worked on preparing the RFP, collecting the requirements, defining them, etc., and they may have hired like a consultant. All that, the cost of all that is considered part of the customer's total cost of ownership. Also, after the delivery, after the completion of the project, when the service provider leaves, the customer will operate the system. There will be employees or staff to operate the system. Also, they may have a support contract to support the system, etc. So throughout the operational cycle, they will carry on some costs. All that cost will be included as part of the customer's total cost of ownership of the system. Very much we can say that with the BBC you pay for performance very much. In the following slide we will see the details. Okay, now with this slide we talk about the various aspects of the BBC implementation. We start with the business case. So the business case is very much a document that explains the scope of work, the requirements, etc., what is needed to be carried on by the targeted project. Then the outcomes. what do we need to get out of the project? Then the measures. What are the quality factors or metrics that we need to use or consider when we measure the performance of the outcomes? The levels. Now, the performance levels here, let's say we agree with the service provider as a customer. I agree with the service provider on a certain set of specifications of the outcomes of the project to be carried on by the service provider. If they get me a solution with the specifications that match 100%, that matches 100% the asked for or the required specifications, then we say they complied with what we asked for. They may achieve something better or they may achieve something less quality-wise or performance-wise. So initially we have 3 levels of performance: as is, which comes in the middle, or beyond or better than the as is, so they come up with something better than what we asked for, or below, so they come up with something with the specifications lower than what we asked for. Now, so basically we have 3 levels. However, the beyond or the higher level, we may classify it into sub-levels as well. We say, okay, they are 10% better than what we asked for, or they are 50% better than what we asked for, etc., etc. Now, with the lower level, they may say, indicate in the contract, if they come up with something like 80% of what we asked for, then we won't pay them more than 80% if they come up of the said payment value. If they come up with, let's say, 40% of what we ask for, we may say in the contract that we won't pay anything, we won't accept that work, or if they want to give us that work, we will take it for free, and so on. So classifying the level of performance into sub-levels, that helps us decide on what to do with the various possibilities of when it comes to performance. Now, the payment is associated with the levels. We may say payment and incentives. We may say, for example, if they come up with what we asked for exactly, then we pay them what is said in the contract, the basic or the original payment value. If they come up with something less, let's say anywhere between 80% but less than 100%, then we will pay them 80%. If they come up with something between 50% and 80%, we may say we'll pay them 50% of the payment. Below 50%, we won't pay them anything, and we may say we don't want the software or the system from you. Now, if they come up with the higher category, if they come up with something better than what we asked for, by, let's say, up to 30%, then we say we will pay them 10% extra. Beyond 30%, we may say we'll pay them 20% extra, and so on. So that's what we mean by the associating the payments and the incentives with the performance levels. Then the contract itself and the reviews of that contract. Well, basically, that's all for the first lecture of Module 4. I'll be looking forward to meeting with you at Lecture 2, which will be very much a continuation of the BBC and other topics as well. Thank you.